Hello everyone, and welcome back to the RimWorld 1.5 Anomaly DLC series, where we are still currently coming off the back heel here of what happened last episode, with Moon almost dying, as well as Luna and poor Oscar actually dying to the metallic sphere entity from the void. Now, of course, those events were very devastating, but I do want to try to move on and maybe get to some more joyous things like the new mod that I've added that is Name Your Entities. As the name would suggest, this mod will actually allow us to give our entities proper names in the game instead of me just calling them by their names. To begin with, and to test out the mod to ensure that it's working correctly, I would go ahead and give Hedgehog as well as Rainbow their proper names, and yes, indeed it does seem to work. Next up, we have the name for our finger spike, and we're actually going to be naming this little fella Flamingo, but of course I didn't come up with this wonderful name. No, this was given to me by one of you guys. In particular, this name was given to us by MewCoYT, who is saying that because of the strange tentacle tail with the spike on the end, it kind of gives it the appearance of a flamingo, and I agree. After that, though, of course, we also have the name for our tough spike, which is going to be Meatball. And of course, this splendid name was given to us by our friend Mr. Dax. No reason stated, but I would think that it's pretty obvious, to be honest. Though I will say, in my professional opinion, I think he looks a little bit less like a meatball and probably more like a hot dog with some tentacles or whatever those mandibles are. Now, as for our dark, frightening creatures from the abyss, for the time being, I am going to leave them unnamed, as I'm still trying to catch up with some of the names that you guys have left for our other creatures. This will give everyone a good bit of time to get their own names in from the last episode as well. Sometime later, though, we would have a wet, dreary drifter that would approach the base not too far away. And I know, I remember what we said about the last drifter that we took in, so I took that into consideration, of course, but this drifter seems to have some type of disease or ability that will actually allow him to resurrect from the dead, which kind of makes me think he sounds more like an entity than a drifter. Well, because of that, I decided to try and arrest him instead, which didn't exactly work out. At least, not the first time around. It turns out he does indeed resurrect from the dead, just like that corpse that we had dealt with previously. Like I mentioned, I think he may very well be linked to it somehow, or that type of entity. But of course, that's just speculation. Anywho, though, Van managed to take him down once more. This time around, we didn't kill him, so we could capture him. We immediately took him to our prison, that way we could begin enslaving him. Now, I realize that seems a little bit counterintuitive, because I said I don't want him to join us, but you guys have asked quite a few times for a D-class set of people who will actually do the very dangerous tasks that are involved with the void and the entities, and I think he would be perfect, especially since, I mean, he literally resurrects every time he dies. Speaking of entities, one of ours ended up getting a wild hair, thinking that it could escape containment, but Jasper wasn't having that. He quickly took it down and we put it back in its cage. Nothing too difficult there, but you know what was? What was going to be difficult was enslaving Robert, because I hadn't noticed, but apparently these drifters have an extremely high will. Quite frankly, I've never seen will this high on any other pawn in the game at all. But because of this, instead of simply trying to enslave Robert, I thought it might be best to build him his very own room with the containment facility here, where we could actually keep him and not only enslave him, but we could also try to study him. We would be doing both, periodically switching back and forth, which seems very tedious, and trust me, it is, but it is well worth it. As you can see, Robert here actually gives us advanced research points, and since we no longer have our sphere after it went crazy and killed one of our people, we need another way to get this advanced research other than the monolith. We would then begin trading with an exotic goods trader that was in orbit around this planet. We would actually end up selling a few things to them and purchasing some very interesting serums they had. Well, to be more specific, we only bought one type of serum, but we bought 4 of that serum. It was actually a metal blood serum. Essentially, what this is it turns your blood into Obelisk. You know, the liquid that turns into a solid when you try to hit it, so I thought that could be useful. Useful for several different scenarios, such as the one we're about to find ourselves in. We're going to be sending a caravan out to this small little outpost that has sent out a distress signal. They didn't really specify as to what the threat was, only a bunch of screaming. So naturally, we're interested, as screaming normally entails entities. After arriving, even from a distance, we could immediately see what the issue was. This entire outpost was infested by Fleshbeast. There was no pit gate, so I was curious as to how this had happened, though there were many other smaller burrows. I believe because of the vicinity of this outpost to our main base and the pit gate that we had when it collapsed, maybe these creatures are coming from those same caverns and creating these very small burrows before they come up. Well, in that case, I suppose I'm very glad that we brought our new metal blood serum with us in case we need it. Spoiler, we end up needing it. For you see, though there are not many of the beast, I got a bit cocky and Fugly got pinned down by two of them, unfortunately, getting stabbed a few times. So I would have her take the serum to try and avoid any death in the very near future. We will need to be extremely careful with our Hellcat rifles though, because this serum makes them succumb to fire much easier. And as we all know, fire is a very useful tool against these flesh monsters. We began filling in all their little burrows before going throughout the base, trying to destroy as much of these walls as possible, looking for anything that may be salvageable or useful. We would encounter a couple of these flesh sacks, but they didn't have too much of interest within them, a shard, and then the next one that we encountered had a dead person with tainted apparel, but we would take their smoke pop pack. Who knows, perhaps it could prove useful in a combat situation in the very near future. For the next little bit, I would go through, kill as many of the remaining beasts as possible, and started going through the rest of the building, the flesh walls, just looking for any survivors as well as useful items, but I came up empty-handed. As we were leaving though and heading back home, we would encounter some friendly tribes people who wanted to do a little bit of trading with us. I ended up buying a ceremonial hood and ceremonial mask, because just like our good friend Namvo3013 puts it, it's not only a great hood for rituals, but also it kind of serves as a helmet as well. And because it offers some very ample protection for the old noggin, I decided it might be fitting to give it to Moon. We would also end up giving the bioferrite ceremonial mask to her husband Akio. Don't the two of them just look like such a loving little couple? Though once again we were all a bit concerned at how ecstatic they were to wear these ceremonial headdresses, especially since the history of these hoods and or helmets are for worshippers of the void. Also, a bit of a side note, I know little Luna has to be scared shitless while her mother wears this while breastfeeding her, like suckling the teat of a monster. Now that that's taken care of, I want to begin dabbling in some of the electronic devices that we've actually unlocked through our research into the void and the anomaly. Now this is a sleep suppressor. Once built within the area where people sleep, they will actually have reduced fatigue and they'll be able to sleep less and work longer, the ideal work environment for us. We also finished up basic research into skip abduction. I put this off for a while and I don't know why, because apparently what this will allow us to do is harness the void to manipulate space and time to bring an enemy here so that we can capture them. And of course, since we're running low on manpower at the moment, we would immediately try out this new ritual. This specific ritual does require an offering of bioferrite, but we have plenty from our entities. With our new ceremonial hoods and our bioferrite ceremonial mask, the call of the void was so much louder and so much more powerful. At first, I wasn't too sure that it had worked, but then teleported in an Imperial soldier who we would promptly take into our prison. The power of the almighty void was a little bit too much from the ritual for his feeble mind, and this put him into a coma for a few days. Upon further inspection, I realized that they are quite the fighter, and that's really about it. And also, they're a woman, not a man. I said he a moment ago, whoopsie. Coincidentally, not too long thereafter, we would actually have a raid by the Miasma Slickers, who were arriving in 3 different groups. Apparently they're unusually clever with their tactics. We'll see about that. They definitely couldn't have been as smart as the game was giving them credit for, because they didn't avoid the turret at all. As a matter of fact, they walked right by it, and in doing so immediately putting themselves right in the line of fire of all of our rifles. 2 out of the 3 groups had gathered together to try and attack us head on too, which was a big mistake on their part. The 3rd group was one guy, and he tried to sneak up from behind us, but it didn't work out for him. After that, the majority of the forces were completely killed, except for a few here and there. A few of them were actually incapacitated on the ground, so we decided to take them prisoner as their stats were pretty okay for the most part. They could at least defend themselves. And that's a theme that we're going to be sticking with this episode, of trying to recruit and enslave many of the people that we encounter, as some of them, like this one here, are going to be part of our D class. Thus, they have been enslaved. We would end up, of course, making a pretty little necklace for them to wear as well. Much of the day-to-day work of the D class is just cleaning up some of these containment cells, nothing all that dangerous, unless an entity somehow breaks out, which does happen pretty often. Now, the other person that we had taken prisoner would actually end up being recruited instead of enslaved, and this person would join our security team instead, helping us secure, contain, and protect. Then after that, we would actually begin researching on how to make our own metal blood serum. This way we don't always have to buy it from traders, and we could just kind of whip it up in-house. Once we're able to do that, they would be perfect to take out on missions such as the one we're embarking on right now to a nearby farming site. We plan on attacking the farmers, killing as many as we can, but hopefully none of them, to be honest with you, as I would like to have them join us in Harmony at the Foundation, either as D class or as our own security. Of course though, only the toughest may join our security team, so we must try to kill them at the very least, and the survivors can join our ranks. Boop. A few of them were cowards though, fleeing from us as we were shooting at them. We didn't need them among our ranks anyhow. But this fella, on the other hand, showed great bravery during the battle. He would be a perfect specimen for our security. And as a bonus, we had plenty of rice to eat on the way back home. But we're actually not going back home, at least not yet. We have yet another farming work site that I would like to try and visit and maybe do some recruiting, if you know what I mean. Of course you do, we already talked about it. Jumping straight into the eye of the tornado, these farmers were actually quite brave, immediately trying to attack us head on. We ended up catching them on fire, catching them with quite a few bullets, and eventually many of them would fall. We ended up taking a few of them prisoner as well. Nothing too unique or interesting there. On the way back home though, I knew it was going to take a while, so we would begin working on trying to build up our prison a little bit more for some slave quarters as well as just new prison cells in general, to ensure that we have ample housing for our new D-class members. The Caravan would arrive sooner than expected though, within a few hours, and we done the best that we could to accommodate our new compadres. Many of them would have to bunk together though, because these new rooms had yet to be completed. After some time though, we had finally recruited 2 of them. Well, recruited by force is probably a more accurate description. They would immediately be tasked with helping our only other D-class member in cleaning all of these containment cells. Fret ye not, my friends, if I can find something more dangerous for them to do, I'll definitely let them. Speaking of danger though, the danger from these entities continues to grow, and currently we are running out of room for more of these containment chambers. So because of that little issue, we are expanding our large walls here to make room for more chambers. But as we were doing so, something horrible happened. No, your eyes do not deceive you. I'm afraid yet another of these fears has appeared. The exact same kind that killed Oscar last episode and almost killed Luna and Moon. Now that we know ahead of time exactly what this entity is capable of, we would actually have one of our D-class take it to an unspecified location. Well, let me specify, it is in the absolute furthest corner of the map that I could get to try and keep it there away from us, of course. We will need to deal with it going unstable, but that's a problem for the very near future. As for now, I wanted to build some additional containment cells just in case we have any weaker entities that we want to put in here that we don't exactly have space for at the moment. After that, we would then grant Akio the supreme moralist role in our colony. Essentially, he is the religious leader. If I were a betting man, and I am, I would say that his rise to political and religious power may have something to do with his spousal choice, but who am I to judge? After that, we would end up having yet another exotic goods trader in orbit, and we would begin doing a little bit of trading with him. We actually ended up purchasing 2 synthetic organs and a book. The organs we purchased were a bionic heart and a coagulator. I assume a coagulator is an organ, it doesn't matter. We're going to install it on Fugly here, who I have chosen to be the captain of our security force. The coagulator implant will actually begin releasing coagulator factors into the bloodstream and the body in the response to some blood loss. Simply put, if she starts losing a lot of blood, this implant will release things into her body to try and stop that from happening. After installing her bionic heart, we actually had her normal heart, so we decided to put it in our freezer. We didn't know if we were going to sell it or what. Nobody really needs one, so we'll leave it here next to our sandwiches. Once the anesthesia had wore off and she was back on her feet, she was right as rain. And as you can see, her moving was increased by 5%, but her blood pumping by 25%. We'll continue upgrading her as much as possible when we have the opportunity. For a little while, we would attempt to focus solely on recruiting the 2 remaining prisoners that we currently had, and this time around I do indeed mean recruiting, not enslaving, into our D class. Yes, indeed, these 2 members would be the 2 brand new members in our security force, along with Jasper, Tony, Fugly, and the others. They may not look like much for right now, and truth be told, most of them are not, but with some time, equipment, and a whole lot of training, they could become quite the fighting force, which is exactly what we intend on creating. Sticking with our theme of security though, our defenses, after we build our new walls, could use a little bit of an upgrade, so we're going to be building plenty more of these wooden spike traps as well as a brand new turret down here. Not only that, but we're also working on securing our containment chambers much better with some proper security doors. I've been saving up a lot of plasteel for the last few episodes for this exact purpose, and we still didn't have enough to finish them all, but we'll get around to it. I'm pretty happy with how things are finally coming together. The base looks a lot nicer and much more uniform and organized. After that, we would try to do a void provocation ritual to try and provoke the void into sending new entities our way. Nothing too special here, just a standard ritual. Not too long after that, another mysterious obelisk had crashed nearby. At first, I didn't really care because the description of the obelisk was identical to the warped obelisk we had a few episodes ago. But after looking at the entity codex here, I can actually see that the 2 are separate entities, not the same at all. Meaning that even though they were both part of a much larger Archotech machine at one point and connect to organic life, they both have different purposes. But we'll need to do some extensive studying before we can find out its true purpose. In the meantime, we're going to begin researching Starflight basics. It was never our intention to permanently stay on this planet, and once our research mission is completed, we're going to need a way off this rock. Though not everyone will be leaving, just our researchers, and young Luna here, who can actually walk. That's right, she's no longer a little baby in a crib, she's now, I guess, a toddler. I've never met a toddler that can navigate this large city that we're building here, but I guess Luna is one of a kind. We also ended up having Wise, who somehow was having an affair with one of our D class. I just wanted to bring this up because it seems like Wise keeps having affairs with anyone she meets here. Not cool, Wise, not cool at all. Not too far from our base though, we had an ancient danger, and given its proximity to the ancient monolith here, I thought that the 2 of them could somehow be linked possibly. Moon and Akio said that they could feel a dark presence pulling them towards this place. The only way for us to find out for sure would to be to tear down one of these walls and to go in. As soon as the wall came down, 2 finger spikes came rushing out towards everyone. It would appear that we may have been correct. This place at the very least would have to have some type of unnatural connection to the Fleshbeast and the labyrinth that they came from. There was nothing in the center of this building though. The only thing that was in here was a crate and 3 cryosleep caskets. So, of course, we decided to open one. 3 very injured gentlemen fell out of the cryosleep caskets. They didn't appear to be able to walk, nor did they appear to be able to even defend themselves. It's almost as if they had been severely injured during some type of battle and rushed into their caskets as a last resort. After speaking with them further, it turns out they were fleeing those flesh monsters many years ago before jumping into their cryosleep caskets. We explained to them that we had killed the remaining few that were in there, and because of this, their resistance was very low, and they ended up joining us. They were eager to join a team just like theirs originally was. Turns out they too were looking into the void and the anomaly, but they could not defeat the pit gate, as any other remaining survivors of their faction had died when it happened. With most of their companions dead and their base becoming overrun by the monsters, the only thing left for them to do was to jump into the caskets. With all these new recruits recruits joining us in such a short period of time, we were running a bit low on residential housing, so we decided to commission to build some here in the northwest section of our base. But this was interrupted when we had a raid from Horak's Cultist? This was our first time encountering this cult, and to be honest with you, it was a bit surprising. We'd never met anyone else that could use the void with these rituals like we do. They were going to summon Fleshbeast to attack us. Is it a coincidence that we recently rescued some ancient soldiers that had fought these Fleshbeasts many years ago, and now we have these cultists coming to attack us with the same ones? No, I highly doubt it. We would try to engage them as quickly as possible to try and stop the ritual, but as we had approached, many of them came out to try and stop us from stopping their ritual. They seemed to heavily outnumber us, but we did have superior weapons as they were mostly carrying clubs, maces, swords, things of that sort, and we had a smorgasbord of bullets. We needed to speed this along though because the ritual was almost complete. We were running out of time. We had finished off the first wave of the cultists, but here came a second. Now some of them were actually carrying some assault rifles, so it was a bit more dangerous than the previous wave, but we had managed to take them down quite quickly as well. However, I did notice that the remaining two somehow were springing back to life. It would appear that they have a similar death refusal ability as young Robert that we had captured earlier in the episode. And this battle helped us realize a little bit about the death refusal. We also had captured one of the cultists and we decided to turn them into a D-class. With all our new members, D-class or otherwise, I decided that we needed some more chairs and tables to eat our meals at because things were getting a little bit more cramped. Not that they're any better right now, we'll have to do something about that later. Because as for the moment, we have a very large group of shamblers that have entered the area and they're looking to try and snack on our juicy bone marrow. For this specific attack, I think I'll take a note from the book of our friend Just Another Gravemind. We'll use the Angry Sphere to try and kill all the shamblers. This will make a really good test run for when the sphere eventually goes unstable, and we have 10 days to do this exact same thing by using the Draw Shamblers ritual. So far I'm pretty impressed with it. It's taking them down, but they're actually giving it quite a run for its money, and the most important part, of course, they are both keeping each other distracted. Or at least that was the case for quite a few hours. Eventually, though, the sphere was a little bit tuckered out from killing all the shamblers and decided that it was done. It was going to take itself a little nap. I suppose we'll have to come in and finish up the job for it. Not that we really mind. It did kill the majority of the shambler forces for us. We could handle a handful on our own. After that, we wanted to conduct an experiment. We had one of our D-class, and he wasn't that great. The only thing he was useful at was some growing implants, but we decided that maybe we implant him with one of these Archotech shards and turn him into a ghoul. Not only is this the perfect test for one of our D-class, but also they're much more useful to us as a ghoul than they were as a filthy servant who cleaned our floors. Plus, now Van has a lunch buddy to hang out with. Aww. We had finally made some more extensive research into the Obelisk that had dropped from orbit. We've learned that this device has the power to duplicate intelligent creatures. In theory, it could even produce duplicates without limit. It also appears to be significantly damaged, and if we were to go too long without suppressing it, it could start chaotically pumping out large numbers of flawed human duplicates. We may also be able to use it to our advantage, and eventually we may also be able to find out how to safely shut it down. If we wanted to, that is. Based on my understanding of this, assuming these duplicates are pretty useful, we could have our very own little clone army. We decided to bring our enslaved cultist up to be our very first guinea pig for this new obelisk, to see just how well this duplication method actually works. While interacting with the obelisk, it pulsed with energy and generated a flash of light. She found herself face to face with a copy of herself. The duplicate claims to be the real one, and has joined our colony. More importantly, this duplicate has joined us as a colonist, not as an enslaved D-class. And they are indeed an exact copy. Because of this, I'm going to give them the predictable name of Ramos 2.0 because, well, they're the second one, even if they do claim to be the original. I did immediately begin to notice an issue with this clone, though. They had organ decay in their lungs and their kidneys. Basically, what this means means is that the duplicate here is literally rotting from the inside out. I'm glad that we didn't decide to make duplicates of anyone else. Now, I did have a little bit of an idea though. It is the ritual to imbue a death refusal onto somebody. Essentially what this will do is bring someone back to life after they die, replenishing any of their missing organs or limbs or things of that sort, but there is a little bit of a side effect to that after it's done, although we'll have to see what that's like once we're finished. And just giving it the old college double check here, it would appear that she does now have a death refusal, meaning she is going to spring back to life after she dies. This will only work one time as for now. But Rat Knight, oh my god, it's going to take forever for her to get around to dying. We'll have to wait for an attack and yada yada. That's where you're wrong. Well, that was fun. And hey look, it looks like she's finally springing back into action. Back alive once again. Although, I don't think my plan really worked out. Maybe if there was a way for us to specifically target those organs, or if we would have removed them before she died. Oh well, I suppose we could just do another death refusal, and then before she dies of the organ failure, it'll bring her back to life. I don't know. Now on to our research into the anomaly. We are actually running a bit low on things to research, as we've almost got all the basic completed except for one, and a good majority, a good chunk of the advanced research as well. And that would mostly be because we've discovered all of the basic entities, and we are getting a good chunk of the advanced entities as well, although there are still two ultimate that we have no clue what they could even be. Regardless though, we must continue advancing our knowledge of the void, and the only way to really go about doing that is by provoking it to send us more entities and more horrible things. I didn't think much of this provocation ritual, as nothing really happened until it started to rain all of a sudden. But this was not your average thunderstorm, no. This was blood falling from the sky, with no specific point of origin. We couldn't actually determine if it were actual blood though, as it is a thick blood-like fluid that causes you to become enraged if you're exposed to it for too long. Now this does make us much stronger during our melee attacks, but it would also cause us to go berserk and animals to become manhunters. A bit problematic to say the least. I would immediately begin using our area tool to try and map out some small paths to all the different buildings that we needed access to ensure the majority of the time our people were not outside in the rain. And for the most part here in the beginning, this was actually working quite well. Nobody was exposed for too long, and there weren't really any issues until the animals started going insane. And that in itself was a pretty big problem because we had a lot of animals here on the map. There was only one solution to this issue. We would still need to be quite cautious though and stay inside as much as possible because we were beginning to get a mild dosage of the blood rage. It did seem, however, that our ghouls were not having this issue, as they could spend countless hours out in the blood rain fighting off the savage beast without any repercussions, except for their wounds, of course. And I'm very glad that it didn't affect the ghouls in the same way, because a ghoul with a blood rage would be very hard to deal with. After well over a day to about 2 days though, the blood rain had finally subsided, and in its wake we actually had a freezer full of dead animals, meaning that we have plenty of meat to eat for quite a while. We had also finally enslaved Robert and his undying body, which was pretty cool, I guess. I mean, we can technically do the ritual ourselves now, but I don't know, it's still an accomplishment, I feel. And for the time being, we would end up giving him some of the mundane task of the other D-class. Now, I will say the blood rain and the man-hunting animal packs actually helped me realize a pretty significant defense flaw that we have with our walls. It feels like having these two openings is causing us to always be flanked by enemies when we're attacked, especially if they're in separate groups, so I've decided to limit it to one opening for our base. We would then have a combat supplier in orbit around the planet, and we would end up selling them quite a few weapons that we got from the Cultist in exchange for a prestige cataphract helmet that we quickly gave to Fugly, since she is the captain of our security forces, and also because I'm basically trying to turn her into our first super soldier. With those extra layers of defense though, I decided to try another provocation ritual to see if we can can discover yet another entity from the void, and so we did, of course. Enter the Devourers. A swarm of huge gape-maw monsters are coming straight for us, large enough to swallow a human whole. And they sure as shit look like they could, too. They are massive. We quickly opened fire on these massive creatures, but they were quite swift, even given their size, grabbing many of our colonists and swallowing them whole. We were able to rescue our colonist after being swallowed, given that we did enough damage to the creatures before they could digest them. We would try to close the gap between us and them, as it seemed that they needed a bit of a build-up and a run before they could actually swallow anyone. If we got close enough, they would have to simply engage us in melee combat. We had managed to kill several of them, but for the remaining two, I wanted to try and take them alive, so everyone rushed in with their fist beating on these creatures until they finally downed them. Now with them beaten down, we could actually capture them, take them back to the facility where we could toss them in some of our containment cells. Once they were healed up a little bit, Akio could actually begin studying them, and this is perfect because, as I showed you guys earlier and as we discussed, the bulk of our anomaly research right now is the advanced research tiers. And that's exactly the type of research points that these creatures gave us. It's also worth mentioning, with all the entities that we've actually discovered, we only require one more advanced monolith entity before we can awaken the monolith itself. Now, I don't know what happens when we awaken the monolith, but based on what it's saying here, it looks like we had better be prepared. So I think a good portion of next episode is going to be us getting our defenses truly ready for a massive onslaught of entities, or a extremely large entity, or just getting ready for something. I do of course want to thank you guys though ever so much for watching today's episode. I hope you have truly enjoyed, and I hope you've enjoyed the length of today's episode. Finally, after talking about it for, what is this, episode 7? All these episodes so far, and how I want them to be about 25 to 30 minutes long, we finally have the one that's about 30 or more minutes, so I'm happy about that, and I hope you guys are as well. I did want to ask you guys what you think a good end-game goal for this series might be. Now, of course, like I talked about earlier in the video, I want to do the Starflight basics to try and, build a ship to get our researchers off the planet, but we're not going to be taking everyone, most likely. Some people are going to be staying here to try and secure, contain, and protect, and I mean, I want to know what we should do with those people, I guess. Should we just build up a massive facility like the Foundation, and they would take over it and run it, possibly Fugly, or one of the other leaders that we end up having while our researchers travel back home? Or should our researchers try and stay here? Should Moon maybe stay here, as she obviously is very interested in the anomaly and the void, and maybe Jasper goes back home to report his findings and research? Sorry, I know that was very long-winded, and I'm yapping about that, but those are kind of my ideas as to how I could see it ending, but I want to hear what you guys have to say. But once again, thank you guys ever so much for watching. I love you, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.